Wasting money on cures. Forgot how to fix myself. They say that time is free. Then why is it so precious? Oh, I'll save memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. Time is running out. Time is running out. Lately I've lost my track. I've sailed the deepest seas, hoping to find something to bring back better times. Oh, I'll save memories in my head, like Polaroids on walls. They remind you to look ahead. But time is running out. 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 Time is running. Time is running out. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over. They can't be over now. Time is running out. What if my best days are over? They can't be over now. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Okay, hi there. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a gloriously sunny Friday morning here in Yorkshire. I've been out and about, have had my breakfast, and I'm ready to go for our live stream today. We're going to take a little bit of time to think about macro application. Lots of questions. First half of the session on the world economy, international economics, including trade, and then we'll focus a bit more on the UK. Now, on Sunday, we're going to do a policy live stream, monetary, fiscal, supply side and trade policies. So we're going to stay clear of policy in this session, focus a bit much more on the sort of data application side of things. And then on Monday morning, don't forget the exams in the afternoon. AS macro is in the morning, but A2, year 13, paper 2 is in the afternoon. So Monday morning, we're doing a little warm-up activity, lots of multiple choice, gentle calculation questions, answering your questions for 40 minutes or so as we head before the exam. Then there's a big gap, isn't there, between paper 2 and paper 3, the synoptic paper. So I hope your papers are going well across the different subjects. Welcome to the hundreds of you who are joining us live. If you are, please, first of all, like and subscribe to the channel, and then you can contribute to our chat window. Let's make a start. I've got 4 big reveals for you spread throughout the session. So we're looking for 4 different countries. Post your answer in the chat window. Jim in the production team will be looking to see who gets the first right answer. So here we go. Here's the first clue. GDP per capita above $130,000. PPP, one of the highest in the world. Next clue comes in. Over 85% of its workforce are expatriates. Answers flying in. I think we do have a correct answer, so our production team will look at it. Number 3, hosted a global sporting event that cost over $200 billion to stage. Keep going with your answers, everybody. Really good to see. Clue number 4, its natural gas exports are amongst the world's largest, a really good example of comparative advantage. And the final clue, it has no income tax for individuals. So loads of answers coming in. Congratulations to everybody. Did our production team spot the first right answer? I think Daniel 127. You've got the first award, Daniel. It is indeed Qatar. Now we do 4 of these. They get progressively harder as we go through this session. Let's try a few multiple choice. What I've done here is I'm thinking the world economy this year. So can you get the following ranks in the right order? So rank the following countries by inflation expectations for this year, highest to lowest. And your 3 countries are Brazil, Japan, and the United Kingdom. So what do we think? Rank the following countries by inflation expectations. The consensus seems to be B, coming through. I'm posting the answer on the chat window here. 3 people saying D, the UK higher inflation than Brazil. Most of you saying that Japan has the lowest inflation. Let's double check. It is B. Well done, everybody. Yeah, just moving on. The next slide, the next little build. Yeah, so typically faster growing countries like Brazil generally have higher inflation expectations. Indeed, they nearly always have higher inflation targets. Inflation is built into the Brazilian economy more so in developing countries like Brazil and India than it is in the UK. UK comes second, Japan lowest. Of course, you'll know what's happened in Japan in the last 25, 30 years. Japan now has positive inflation, which for Japan is good news. Let's try another one. This is all application, by the way. Rank the following countries by national debt as a share of GDP last year, highest to lowest. Sporting Fire says, didn't Japan put its interest rates negative in COVID? It did indeed. Superb application there. Thank you. So what about this one? National debt as a share of GDP, highest to lowest. The vast majority of you are saying A. Let's double check. The answer is A. Good. Can you post in the chat window, please, roughly speaking, what is Japan's debt as a share of GDP? And also, if you know, what's Italy's national debt as a share of GDP? What do we think here? So, really, thank you to Otto and Daniel and Will and Ishan. Japan's national debt is around 250% and Italy's is 160. Yeah. Now, interestingly, again, just in terms of context here, Japan has the highest national debt in the world, I think, certainly amongst advanced nations, but its bond yields are really low, 0.1, 0.2%. So actually, its debt interest as a share of GDP is relatively low, and most of Japan's debt is owed to domestic investors, whereas Italy has a high debt to GDP ratio, 150% or so, but yields are high, around 5%. So therefore, Italy spends about 4% of their GDP on, or 3.6%, to be more accurate, 3.6% of GDP on debt interest. So Japan has a higher level of debt. It's not just the level of debt that matters, it's the cost of the debt. Little evaluation point. I know some of you are revising national debt for your macro paper. Here's number 3. Can you rank the following countries by export dependence? Export dependence is measured by exports of goods and services as a percentage of GDP. And your 3 countries are Germany, United States, and China. What do we think? And what we're doing in our session today, we're staying a little clear of theory. We're doing a bit of theory, but our aim is just to prime some application on the macro side to get you thinking about macroeconomics. What do we think? Lots of answers coming through. Nice mix of opinions. A lot of people saying B. Let's have a look at the answer. The answer is A. This is again worth knowing. Germany is an export powerhouse. The next slide, just a bit of explanation there that Germany is highly export dependent. Pardon me. Less so than countries like Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and so on, but it's a highly export dependent country. Around 70% of GDP is linked to trade. China, less so, 40, 45%. United States, around 25, 30%. effectively the United States is more of a closed economy. It doesn't rely as much on trade as a share of GDP than other countries. It's quite a nice little valuation point given the policy focus on tariffs. Question number 4. I love this one. Now, rank the following countries by Human Development Index. Now, what I've chosen here are 3 EU countries. You don't necessarily get an HDI question on low income, lower middle income nations. So what do we think here? Can you rank following countries by HDI score from highest to lowest last year? Portugal, Greece, and Czech Republic. What do we think here? Lots of answers coming through. Giles has gone for B. Ricky's gone for A. Will D. Just Kirat has gone for C. Let's see. There's a big variation here. You wouldn't necessarily expect the answer. It is, in fact, D. The Czech Republic is a really interesting economy. It has a floating exchange rate. It's outside the euro. It's inside the single market, obviously. It scores really well on HDI, including alongside countries like Poland, Slovenia and Slovakia. In fact, the Czech Republic, which joined the EU in 2004, has surpassed Portugal and Greece in terms of per capita incomes and HDI. Now, Greece has fallen back, and this is one point I wanted to make. It's a good application. That Greece, of course, suffered grievously from the global financial crisis, in part because of policy mistakes. So they had a series of interlinked economic and financial crises. They lost at least 15 years worth of HDI progress. And it could take 15, 20 years to rebuild. So Greece is suffering from a kind of macroeconomic hysteresis there in terms of HDI. Here's number 5. Can you rank the following countries by GDP per capita, PPP, this year? I'm using the IMF's latest global report, which came out on Tuesday. And your 3 countries are China, Malaysia, and Mexico. What do we think? Sporting Fire comes in. Portugal is one of the few countries that has a worse HDI than its former colonies. Interesting. I have to go double check that. Sporting Fire, I'm sure you're right. What do we think here? Lots of answers coming through. By the way, thank you for those of you who are subscribing and contributing to the chat. A lot of people saying A. Quite a few. Joe Kent says, what's PPP? It was great to meet Joe at the Grey Booster. Joe, PPP, purchasing power parity. So you take the income per capita in dollars, let's say, and adjust for living costs in countries. So you get a PPP adjusted figure. And thanks to the Bad Gamer for helping people out there. What do we think? Most people saying C. Let's double check, actually. It is C. Yeah, Malaysia outpaces China, which outpaces Mexico. Now, all 3 of those countries, I think, are good examples to note and use according to the next build. These are countries that are middle income, upper middle income nations. So they have escaped from low income. Malaysia, years ago, Mexico and China. They are all upper middle income nations. But, and here's those of you revising development economics, it is very hard to transition from middle income status to high income status. A few countries have done it, including Greece and Israel and others. Can you make that leap from middle income to high income? You need to achieve a structural transformation of your economy to do it. Great stuff. Let's crack on. Loads of application questions. Oh, here's the next big reveal. So the last answer was Qatar. Here we go. Pardon me. Generates 95% of electricity from renewables, mostly hydro and geothermal. So post your answers in the chat window, everybody. Let's see. Straight away, Sugar Boy says North Korea. How can you get it after one clue? Second clue. Abolished its military in 1949. I can think of a country. I know a country that abolished its military in 1950. It's the wrong answer. A lot of people saying Iceland. Number 3. Global leader in eco-tourism and biodiversity protection. A lot of people saying Greenland, Denmark, Switzerland. We do have a right answer. Number 4. Life expectancy of over 80 years. That's not particularly special. The 5th clue. spends over 7% of GDP on education, amongst the highest globally. So very strong commitment to environmental sustainability, biodiversity, ecotourism, and human capital. And I think we have the right answers coming through now. Maybe it was Oscar, the first right answer. Our production team will find out. So a big hat tip to Oliver. Oliver Stankovic said Costa Rica. Well done. Let's crack on, everybody. We're doing well. By the way, thanks for taking your time out to do some revision with us today. We're just doing lots of application. Now, this is interesting. This chart shows, we can take off the little comment there. This chart shows forecast growth per year from 2016 through to 2050. PwC, the economists at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I know quite a few have actually applied for degree apprenticeships with PwC. It's a great business to be part of. They do this long run kind of economic projections. This is 35 years worth of data, and they try and pick out the growth winners over a very long trajectory. So it's not forward looking macro, big picture stuff. Okay, I've got a couple of questions for you on the 1 minute clock. Let's take Vietnam, please. Let's show your understanding of Vietnam. Can you give me 2 causes of high trend growth in a country such as Vietnam? Have a go. So can you link your understanding of growth theory to a country such as Vietnam? So Naima talks about a large labour force. I'm going to mention that actually in a second, Naima. Really detailed application there from Sammy. Wow. That's almost pure economic geography there. SS talks about Vietnamese economic reforms. I'll mention those. FDI and integration into global production networks. That is a brilliant answer. There we go. Can we get a couple more from our team? There's some amazing answers coming through. I know a lot of students do revise Vietnam as a little case study. Have low unit labour costs causes MMCs to set up manufacturing sites in Vietnam. Excellent point. Increase in investment and net trade due to manufacturing increases AD. Prav, that is a brilliant explanation of essentially a demand side cause, but of course FDI has both demand and supply side effects. Jack Zero or Jacko, trade liberalisation through joining CPTPP allows Vietnam to specialise in goods they have a comparative advantage over, including textiles. Jacko, absolutely brilliant answer, great application, and crucially, that little answer there brings in concepts: liberalisation of trade, specialisation, comparative advantage. Absolutely brilliant answer. I have gone for supply reforms, the Do More reforms. Of course, Vietnam is a kind of socialist market economy. It's quite interesting to study. So things like legalising private enterprise, decollectivization of farming to encourage industrial farming, and liberalising foreign trade liberalisation. So Vietnam has been at the forefront of free trade agreements linked to FDI as well, creating special economic zones and generous tax incentives to attract inward investment. And the other thing, I think I'm not questions putting here, but demographics is on the spec for many countries, particularly if you Edexcel. Vietnam does have a young, growing, and increasingly educated workforce. So investment in human capital, education and vocational quality has an impact on long and aggregate supply. So that would be my 2, and then you drive the demand side factors such as per capita incomes going up and exports and the multiplier effect. I think the next slide actually just gives you a little bit of background on Vietnam. Pardon me. A lot of Southeast Asian countries have a low median age. Vietnam has a median age of 32. Thailand actually significantly higher than that. But look down there, Laos and Philippines, 25 or less. Put things in context, however, Germany last year had a median age of 47 and rising, and the UK has a median age of about 43, 44 and rising. So there's a significant difference in demography. And then allied to that, look at the right-hand side there, labour productivity in Vietnam measured by million Vietnamese dong per employee, so productivity per worker, significant rise over the last 6 years. A lot of it driven by FDI and also economies of scale. So the likes of Samsung building their manufacturing plants at scale. Commercial investment in farming, in manufacturing, in banking at scale lifts labour productivity. So don't be afraid to bring in a micro concept to sustain a macro point, because, as we always say, macroeconomics has micro foundations. That's why I did paper one first. Here's another question. And we know that Bangladesh is forecast to have pretty rapid growth, but can you evaluate, can you think of barriers to growth and development in a country such as Bangladesh? Have a go. So here's a chance to evaluate. We know that Bangladesh has a forecast growth rate of around 4%. Would we could do that in the UK? But what might hold back Bangladesh growth? And again, keep an eye on the chat window for some truly amazing answers. So Daisy talks about some of the limitations of primary product dependency in textiles. John's obviously been advising the Howard-Domar model and low per capita incomes, low savings. Some good stuff coming through, everybody. Well done. Labour talking about labour exploitation by MMCs. A lot of you linking it neatly to the Howard-Domar model, which is great. There stands his point. Labour saving gap is large. People don't have access to banks, and therefore don't store the money in banks. Less funds for commercial lenders, less investment. Okay, so a lot of good stuff there. Quite a few people talking about political instability recently, which is fine, by the way. You can't divorce development economics from political economy. James S. talks about a lack of property rights. Yeah, a lot of you talking about primary product dependency. Bangladesh's main export is textile, so you have to be slightly cautious there. Richard talks about corruption, underspending on public and merit goods, social welfare not optimised, human capital declines, productivity drops, growth slows long term. So Richard will have no problem developing a chain of reasoning with that point. Fantastic stuff. Bilal talking about lack of financial markets. There's many factors. Of course, in an essay, you only have to talk about two, really, and then develop it. So I've gone for infrastructure gaps. I mean, Bangladesh does struggle with poor transport networks, intermittent energy, expensive energy. So that really does increase the cost of doing business. And crucially, the environmental challenges. So Bangladesh is urbanising rapidly, still a massive way to go. But cities like Dhaka, is that a mega city now, face overcrowding, air pollution and poor sanitation. And of course, Bangladesh is one of the countries in the world most at risk from the consequences of climate change, both in terms of farming, flooding, livelihoods, and the infrastructure resilience in its low-lying geography. So Bangladesh is a country with rich growth potential, but major, if you like, supply-side challenges. Great stuff. Next slide, I think. Yeah. Oh, yeah, let's move on to the application spinner. So here we go. Here are 6 industries that are traded globally. And can you give me in the chat window, please, some countries that have a comparative advantage in, I think I've got 3 examples to look at. Farming, in particular beef and soybeans. Right, what do you know about trade theory? What do you know about comparative advantage? Which countries have a revealed advantage? In other words, they run a big trade surplus in these countries. Lots of you saying Australia, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, New Zealand. Yep. Colombia. Okay, excellent stuff. Yeah, let's have a look at my answers. I've gone for Brazil, USA, Argentina and Canada, 4 of the 5 biggest exporters. And of course, critically there, keep in mind the current trade negotiations, including with the United States, about the environmental concerns and the environment in which farming takes place, including animal welfare, food miles, and water scarcity. Let's spin that wheel again. We're not using data here, we're just using application through an example. So can you think of countries, please, that have a comparative advantage in renewable energy-related technologies and equipment? Josh says, am I going to be sniffing mangoes too? Josh, I'm a big fan of mangoes, dried mangoes myself, but I don't have any to hand. So what do we think here? Renewable energy-related technologies and equipment. Pardon me. Countries that have a comparative advantage. Loads of answers coming through. Yeah, China. I need to make it specific, please. So you need to link the country to the specific technology or the equipment. That then gives you the application. Pardon me. You don't need the data, but you need to link the country to the specifics. Okay. Joe says, do they pay you to do this or you are enslaved? Joe, I don't get paid for doing live streams. It's what I do. Okay. So renewable related technologies and equipment. As a lot of you saying Iceland, which is probably true, of course, they've got a natural advantage, natural endowment. Austria, Iceland with geothermal energy. That's not necessarily energy related technology or equipment. Pardon me. Let's have a look at my answers. China with solar panels. Denmark is a really good example with wind turbines. One of the world's great wind turbine producers. South Korea increasingly, batteries for renewable storage. And Morocco has really gone big on solar panel transmission. Now they do have a natural comparative advantage, but they're now building these great interconnectors, the solar panel farms as big as Paris in Morocco, and then exporting that energy to the European Union and the UK. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, one more. Let's spin that wheel one more time. This is all application, everybody. Countries with a comparative advantage in cut flowers and high value farming. Now, I think Edexcel, there was a question on this in 2021 or 2022. This is the market for not just growing flowers, but also cutting them, packaging them and distributing them around the world. Joe Donaldson says Kenya. Josh Bell says the Netherlands. Yep, a lot of people saying Netherlands and Kenya, which is a really good vertical supply chain example. Larry says Netherlands, Rotterdam, flower fields. Superb stuff. New Zealand is mentioned. Willow Hagen says Afghanistan and opium. Yep, always finish on the exam on a high. Let's have a look. Yeah, Netherlands is essentially the world's flower trade hub. And of course, they built that advanced greenhouse tech and logistics and refrigeration. Kenya, of course, has fast air freight to Europe. And Ethiopia is becoming a major producer, especially now they have an international airport in Addis Ababa. You can easily fly out cut flowers to European markets for sale the next day. Great stuff. Now, this is a 1 minute categorize activity on different types of exchange rate systems. Before we start the clock, I wanted to categorize these 8 currencies into either free floating, managed floating, or fixed, semi-fixed. They all appear in only one. So if you can just put, I don't know, floats and then your numbers, managed numbers, fixed numbers. Let's see if you can get all 8 right, and let's start the clock. Good knowledge, good application to know which countries have chosen which exchange rate. What do we think here? Post those answers in the chat when you're ready. If you can get all 8, that would be pretty amazing. So 10 seconds. Keep it on that chat window, everybody. We have an amazing group of students every time incredibly committed. So, great answers coming through. Alex says, oh, wait, the lev is pegged to the euro. Great knowledge. It is indeed. The Bulgarian lev is fixed exchange rate. Well, let's have a look at the answers coming up on the screen, if I've done this correctly. 3 countries are free floating: sterling, the euro, and the US dollar. Yes, I know the Bank of England could intervene in the markets through interest rates. It doesn't. I know that QE affects the value of the exchange rate. It's not a direct intervention. Pardon me. Turkish lira and Japanese yen, 2 great examples of managed floating. And the krona, the lev, both fixed to the euro. So those 2 countries, Denmark and Bulgaria, outside the single currency, but inside the EU, but they have a fixed exchange rate. And for the moment, the Saudi riyal is fixed to the US dollar. Now, for this, why show this? Please do revise the economics and the arguments for and against fixed versus floating exchange rates. Here's another little bit of data for you. This chart shows income inequality in China as measured by something called the Gini coefficient. It expresses an index. So 45 is 0.45, for those of you who know it in different ways. And you can see that over the last 15 or 20 years or so, actually, inequality, measured income inequality in China, has come down. Some people have known about the Kuznets curve, which predicts this does happen. So over to you. Here's a 1-minute challenge. Can you possibly give me 2 reasons why the Gini coefficient in China has gone down? Over to you. So what helps to explain the fact that China is growing richer, but inequality is now starting to fall, albeit from a high level? Let's see what our amazing group of students can come up with on this one. Cookie DW has a really good sense there, a nuanced sense of why this might be happening. Superb point. Well done. Yeah, Tom Leahy, linking that to the Kuznets curve, that you've reached a point where you move beyond the maximum inequality point. But the key reason here, Tom, is why is this happening? Something must be happening. It explains inequality going down. Okay. Ava talks about low-income households have caught up via getting high-paid jobs. It's not just in Hong Kong or Shanghai anymore. So those coastal regions have always done well in a sense, but now maybe the rural areas are catching up. Good. Ben Gomersol, increased investment in rural areas through supply-side policies such as train lines. Yes, the interconnection, the Chinese government investing in high-speed rail certainly helps a process of income convergence. And E talks about Lewis's dual sector model. The economy shifted from a rural-based economy to a manufacturing, urbanized economy. So you have a mass of people, millions of people in formal, albeit in my opinion, relatively low-paid work, but higher paid work than you would get in a rural economy. I think your answers here are really showing an excellent understanding. Well done, everybody. Thank you for that. So I'm linking that to that. So millions of rural residents have moved to urban areas, and typically, not always, but typically, urban areas, economies of scale, they do offer higher per capita incomes, they do offer formal waged employment, and typically they provide better social services. But also Chinese government has brought in pro-poor policies. They have increased social spending on healthcare, basic insurance schemes, 9-year compulsory education, state pensions, and rural welfare, as well as those infrastructure points that Ben talked about. The Chinese government has introduced pro-poor policies because they do believe in inclusive growth. And they brought the Gini coefficient down as a result, although there's still a way to go. Next slide. Let's have a look at something else. This is our next big reveal. We have 2 more to go. Right, so first one was Qatar. Second one was Costa Rica. This is the most populous French-speaking country in the world, and it's not London. Cameron says Canada. Really interesting answer. Arthur says France. Copper is the top export, yet power outages are routine. Third clue. So it could be France. Home to the second largest rainforest after the Amazon. Is that Wales? Fourth point. Experience one of the most deadly modern conflicts. Huge display, millions of people displaced as well as killed. And the fifth point. Vast cobalt reserves, vital for electric vehicle batteries. And we do have some good answers coming through. I think our production team, Spatial Wanderer, wins the third of our big reveals. It is indeed the DRC, the Congo. Let's crack on, everybody. Here is a chart showing human development scores in Southern Africa. Okay, so we can just take off Spatial's outstanding answer. So this is from 2022, and what I try to show you here is the gap between HDI scores in South Africa down to Mozambique. And this is for 2022. So there's obviously a big variation within Southern Africa. So let's just think HDI for a second. Over to you. Can you give me two factors that might hold back HDI improvement in low-income countries? Over to you. So please do revise HDI, how it's measured, the policies that countries can implement to improve their HDI scores. So Flora links to one of the components of HDI, which of course is life expectancy at birth. Some great answers coming through. There's BXN Baker. Limited government spending on those about merit goods. Education is not a public good. Reducing literacy rates. Sporting Fire links this to the repatriation of profits from TNCs that leave the economy. Nelly goes for corruption and conflict can deter FDI from investing in the country, limiting jobs available, limiting development. Yeah, the key there is to link, Nelly, that's a really good point, but to link employment to specific aspects of development. If you have a job that allows you to save, for example, or allows you to improve your basic nutrition. So the key is always to link to something very specific to development. Just about landlocked countries, difficult to get imports into a country, and corruption, government using revenue, education, and healthcare equals low life expectancy. Again, that's good. Yep. Here are my 2 points. Low income and employment. So many of these countries still rely heavily on subsistence farming or low productivity farming. There's limited industrialization and a lot of underemployment, non-employment, formal employment, and of course youth unemployment in many of these countries is persistent. And the other really good point is brain drain or human capital flight. A lot of skilled workers migrate to better paying opportunities. They might move to South Africa, for example, or Western Europe. So these countries find it hard to keep their health workers, their engineers, their teachers, and that can have a direct effect on health and education, which is part of HDI. Great stuff. Let's move on. We're trying to cover lots of bases today. We've got one more on the international, I think. Let's have a look at this one. This chart shows remittances coming into sub-Saharan Africa in 2023 by country. And it's expressed as a share of GDP. And you can see in Gambia, it's 27%. Countries like Senegal, it's 10%. Rwanda, it's 4%. So many of these countries are significant net recipients of remittances. Over to you. Here's another question for you. Can you evaluate, please, one long-term benefit and one long-term drawback of high dependence on remittance? Over to you. A great chance to evaluate here. I do hope you have revised remittances if you're studying development economics. Cookie DW clearly has. Superb answer, thank you. Yeah, Tilly Baines also has a lovely evaluative answer coming through. Thank you, Tilly. In the long run, high reliance can boost human capital as families invest more in health and education, but it may also reduce local job creation and economic self-sufficiency. There's a potential moral hazard there if people become more reliant on remittance income than they do from working. I'm not quite sure how strong that point is. I don't have the data on that. Drawback is it doesn't address the underlying issues with countries' growth rates, supply side issues, or structural unemployment. So that point there is essentially that remittances act as a palliative rather than a fundamental. Long-term benefit can bring families out of extreme poverty. However, over-reliance can lead to inward aggregate supply shifts. Yeah, again, that second point, I am open to some persuasion on that, but the truth is that remittances are now much more important than FDI in terms of incomes. They're more important than aid, and they're more important than debt and capital flows. Remittances are the biggest single net inflow of development finance for many countries now, particularly lower middle income countries. It's one of the big game changers globally. I've got two benefits and two costs for you. Two benefits: household welfare, remittances boost incomes. It's basic stuff, everybody. You can spend more on better food, basic healthcare, primary education, so you can keep more than one kid in school. That helps reduce malnutrition, which eventually, through cognitive development, improves human capital. If you want a great point, by the way, a really good point, remittances provide a counter-cyclical income stream. So often, remittances are relatively stable when an economy goes into recession. It's like an automatic stabilizer. It also creates dollars, and with countries with limited exports, foreign currency can be used to pay for pharmaceuticals or energy or component parts. So it does help the current account of the balance of payments. So those are two benefits. On the negative side, the next slide hints at some long-term drawbacks. Often the remittances themselves are the result of large-scale emigration, those skilled nurses, teachers and engineers, which can have a long-run effect on supply. And there's also the potential risk of the exchange rate. If you get billions of dollars coming in from remittances, that can drive the exchange rate up, which then makes some of your export sectors, particularly price-sensitive manufacturing and farming, less competitive. Excellent stuff, really good. It's an example of a developing country that used to have high remittances is now much more developed. I suppose India would be a good example. It's become less dependent on remittances. And so too countries like the Philippines and Indonesia. Because once you achieve a certain per capita income level and you have a critical mass of millions of middle income consumers, that generates enough domestic demand, C plus I plus G, to sustain the economy. Remittances tend to have more value for people on very low incomes, for whom it's a second source of income or the first one. Let's crack on, everybody. Got about another 10 minutes to go. Those of you staying with us. Here's our last big reveal. World's largest exporter of services by value. Second clue. Large trade surpluses in software, consulting and outsourcing. So very much a service-dominated economy. I think we have our first right answer coming through. Third clue. Real GDP growth often exceeds 6% annually. The average is closer to 5%, but often better than 6%. Fourth clue. Source of a growing number of global multinationals. In other words, not just hosting multinationals, but the genesis for multinationals. A lot of you saying Scotland. It can't be Scotland. Number 5. Recently became the most populous country in the world. So Tilly says the Netherlands. No. Willa Hagen says South Korea. South Korea, well, is the world's oldest country now. It's now a super aged economy. The answer was India. Now, I think India is worth revising. I'll do a little application short on India this afternoon for you. But have a look at this chart. Joe Howson, well done to Joe for getting that right. This chart shows the countries with the largest share of world GDP in 2023, adjusted for PPP. And this is worth knowing as context for your macro paper. Okay, The United States is no longer the world's biggest economy. It just isn't. Okay, China is now the world's biggest economy. India is third, and on a PPP basis, India is almost 2.5 times bigger than Germany and twice as big as Japan. The UK languishing down there in 8th or 9th place, having been overtaken by Brazil and Indonesia. Okay, everybody, let's move on. I've just got a couple of questions for you on the UK. Let's do a bit of work on the UK. We are going to do a policy revision on Sunday, which will be UK based. We're focused on UK economy, UK policy. Have you got these 3 questions? Can you rank these regions, please, by average house price, highest to lowest? And your 3 regions are the Southwest, Southeast, and London. What do we think here? Most people are quite a few things going for B or C. So most of you think London has the highest house prices. Ollie is so confident he's written B 10 times. Let's double check. It is indeed B. The Southwest, of course, includes places like Plymouth, Dorset, Cornwall, where house prices are quite a bit lower. It is B. Okay. Rank. Oh, wait a minute. I've taken out an answer. So rank these regions by home ownership, highest to lowest. I hope I haven't taken out the right answer. My bad, by the way. My mistake. So which of those regions have the highest rate of home ownership? If you think it's A, type A. What do we think here? Lots of variation here. Here's the answer coming up. The answer is B. Southwest, Wales, and London. Okay? And the key point there is that a lot of people can't afford to buy in London, so they have to rent. Did you know that rents in London take up around 65% of median disposable income? Let me just say that again. Okay? Rents in London take up about 65% of median disposable income. Effectively, it's an extra tax of living in London. Okay? Prav says, have you ever considered stand-up comedy? Not really, Prav. I prefer to sit down and tell jokes. Rank these regions by share of employment in manufacturing, highest to lowest. So this is our last little ranking question. Which of these regions have the highest share of jobs in manufacturing? Northeast, Yorkshire and Humber, and the Southeast. What do we think? And the right answer is indeed A, Yorkshire and Humber, Northeast and Southeast. Interesting with Yorkshire, on the East Coast, a lot of manufacturing now, including Hitachi, Siemens, things like building wind turbines, building solar panels, new gigafactories on the East Coast. A lot of manufacturing investment coming into Yorkshire and Humberside, and hopefully the Northeast as well. That will be important in terms of regional development in the next few years. Southeast, of course, dominated by financial services. Great stuff. Okay, let's just quickly look at, in our time left, 1 or 2 things here. First of all, this chart. So I've got a data chart here. This is on the UK. It's a percentage. So over the last 25 years, who is absolutely going to smash the UK economy exam? Can you identify the data in the chart? And I think straight away, this is extremely impressive. If we can pick out our first correct answer, please, Jim, in the production room. This chart indeed shows economic inactivity. Now, this is one of my hot topics for this year. It's not unemployment, it is inactivity. It fell for most. Thank you. So Milena gets the right answer there. So economic inactivity was a huge topic 10, 12 years ago. It really was. I mean, I was teaching, believe me. Then we achieved quite a big fall, albeit from a high level, to about 20%. But in the last few years, it's gone up. So now something like 9.5 million people of working age are inactive in the UK. Over to you, a quick 1-minute challenge. Do you understand this concept? And can you give me 2 causes, please, in the UK context? Over to you. This is good application as well as theory. So inactivity, those people of working age who are not part of the labour force. And it's a really important issue. Believe me, this is one of the big policy issues in the UK at the moment. Leanna, one of our great contributors, talks about mental health, long-term unemployment history research. Yeah, you can build 2 good points there. Phoebe talks about long-term sickness post-pandemic. Yeah, really good stuff. Be careful here, everybody. Please don't go to the default of generous welfare benefits, because it isn't true. It's just not the case. Rohan talks about more young people staying on in education, going to uni. Kai talks about tax disincentives and the poverty trap. That gets you into really good areas. The poverty and the unemployment trap there. Yeah, really good stuff. Some great answers coming through. I've gone for the following, conscious of time, but thank you to Kai and others for those answers. I've gone for sickness and disability. There's no question about this, by the way. There is a mental health epidemic in the UK, and there's a lot of long-term sickness, especially amongst young adults, mental health, and older adults, long-term conditions like long COVID, chronic illnesses. And of course, the consequence for the labour supply and increases in the NHS and state welfare burdens. You know, this is one of the defining issues of our age, and it really is, okay? And then there's a whole issue about demographics and family structure and caring. Mainly affects women, not exclusively. Many people just don't work because of unpaid care work, including caring for elderly or disabled family members. The cost of childcare, limited social care intensifies this issue. So people can't afford social care, they have to stay at home and look after relatives. And of course, perpetuates the gender imbalance in GDP and a loss of potential output. C Rebel says, why can't you talk about benefits, please? Well, you can. There's nothing to stop you talking about benefits. The trouble is that the exams moved on in the last 3, 5, 10 years, and the default answer is it's all to do with benefits really doesn't address the fundamental issues, which are rooted in economic inequality, relative poverty, health access, postcode lotteries. That's the reality. If it was solely to do with benefits, we could have cured inactivity a long time ago. And keep in mind, there are plenty of benefit reformers I support. Okay, encouraging linking benefits to active job search, for example. Okay, so PIP, that kind of stuff is an important point there. Okay, and next slide, next chart. Here's a quick, again, they're just giving you lots of data here, just to familiarize yourself. Can you identify the data in this chart? One line before housing costs, one line after housing costs. And the data is presented in millions. Now, can we be more, can we be specific? Sporting Fire is pretty close, very close. The Bad Gamer one, I think, absolutely gets it, but I think both of you deserve a shout out and a hat tip, and Ben as well. James has absolute poverty. It's not absolute poverty, James. It is indeed relative poverty. Now, again, you need to know this for the exam, so let me just quickly repeat it. Relative poverty is a household income below 60% of median. Say that again. Household income below 60% of median, adjusted for household size. So I live on my own. Could be a family next door with a family of 7 people. So you're going to adjust for household size. And the black line shows after housing costs, blue line before. So we know that housing costs, including rent, is a major factor. Okay, over to you. 1 minute challenge. Can you please give me 2 causes of an increase in relative poverty in the UK? Over to you. So this inequality, poverty, I've given you the application data. Can you now think about causation here? What the underlying causes of relative poverty going up in the UK? The more specific you can be, please, the better. Thank you. Don't forget, an increase in relative poverty can happen both at the top and the bottom of the income scale. Both can widen the gap between rich and poor. Some great answers coming through in the chat window. Daniel 27's answer is, wow, what a brilliant answer. Two really clear points there. Polly makes a really good link between wealth and income inequality, because wealth generates income. Thank you, Polly. Well done. Yeah, Myra talks about rising median income levels due to rising incomes for higher skilled workers. Regional disparities are at the heart of this. Really good. Cookie DW, increased cost of living, etc. Higher nominal income required to afford necessities. There are more people below this threshold as wage increases rise less. In other words, there's been a real squeeze on living standards. Quite a few talking about rising VAT to 20%, having a regressive effect, which is good. I mean, some great answers. It looks like you're all revising inequality quite heavily here. So here are my two answers. I've gone for wage stagnation and welfare reforms. Yeah, it is the case, by the way, that real wages for many low-income earners have either grown very slowly or actually declined in recent times. So you can link that to the rise of part-time, insecure, zero-hours contracts. There's a line here if you want for revision. High employment doesn't guarantee income security. Having a job does not guarantee you get lifted out of poverty. There is a lot of working poverty in the UK. People have at least one, sometimes two jobs, but still have to claim benefits, because you can claim benefits up to the point where your income is above 60%. And the government in real terms has frozen universal credit, child benefit, housing support. Two-child limit, of course, for universal credit is controversial. The benefit cap, controversial. The loss of that £20 universal credit that came in during the pandemic. So there have been some freezes to certain welfare benefits, although pensioners, God bless them, have seen their incomes rise because of the triple lock. And those I've focused at the bottom of the income scale. Many of you talked about executive pay at the top, which is fine. Okay, great stuff. Here is our, I think, our last slide and our last question. Can you identify the data in chart number 3? What do we think? Well done, everybody. Those some superb answers today. So what do we think? Now, Tilly's saying, is it the balance of payments? You need to be a little bit more specific, please, Tilly. People saying current account balance. It's not the current account balance. So you need to be more specific than that. But we're getting pretty close. And I think Matty Peters, congratulations to Matty, who has got the right answer. If you can show the answer, please, Jim, and bring Matty's name up to showcase Matty Peters. It is the balance of trade in goods and services. We haven't really had a lot of questions on trade recently, balance of payments. There's Matty's answer. Thank you, Matty. You can see that UK is running a record surplus in services, but a growing record deficit in goods. So overall, we're running a trade deficit in goods and services, okay, which is part of the current account, okay? And here's my last question for today. Using that data as application, can you give me one demand and one supply side cause of a trade deficit? Over to you. Here's our last question of the day. So this is a really good skill to understand causation, but to link it to demand side causes, so-called cyclical causes, and supply side causes, so-called structural causes. And the UK is a good example to use. So Danielle has a really good point on the supply side, I think. If you can pick out a couple more, please, Jim, and maybe some new contributors. Yeah, relative productivity there from Elena. Makes unit labour costs in the UK a little bit higher. For me. A lot of you are talking about propensity to consume being high, which is really good. So people have a high disposable income and a high propensity. Rory says the UK is pretty much specialised in services. That's exactly right, business and financial. So it needs to import manufacturing goods. It has high cost of labour, so not as competitive on the international market. Rory, that is a tremendous answer. Thank you very much. Georgina talked about dumping of goods from countries with cheaper products. So perhaps the trade deficit is a result of some dumping of steel or some dumping of other products, other countries offloading spare capacity. Lots of good answers about strong pound being a demand side factor. Really good, that's fine. By the way, the examiners will always credit answers which are common sense, that make sense. Okay, Georgina's answer makes sense, but that was really for the previous question on inequality. Okay, here are my two answers. Yeah, I've gone for high MPM. People tend to have a high income elasticity demand for imports. They spend a lot of money on EVs, smartphones, big screens, food, clothing, much of which is imported. We don't necessarily have that capacity there. The application there is the growing trade deficit in goods, including things like EVs. And on the supply side, underinvestment. We have, over the years, invested insufficient amounts in transport, in ports, in broadband networks, in technical education, whatever you want to call it. Our investment as a share of GDP is less than 20%. And that has consequences for supply chain efficiency, cost of delivery, cost of transportation. Low investment limits productive capacity and makes our costs relatively high. Sporting Fire comes in with a point. Let's maybe finish with this. The UK only has one deep water port. Wow, is that Felixstowe, I think? I might be getting to deep water. Oh, Liverpool, okay? I'm getting to deep water with people in Merseyside. But certainly the port in Felixstowe has been extended, but it's not a deep port. Brilliant. Fantastic. Slippery Lamb 26 says, Geoff, what's that behind you? Gosh. Well, you'll be able to see if we now switch. So that is, what is it? Pictures of me umpiring the varsity hockey, Oxford against Cambridge, and a picture, I think, of me at Eton College. About 10 years ago, we had an old school photo when I was head of economics and politics there, back in the day. So this is my new office, my new recording studio. I've got panoramic views over the whole of Yorkshire. I've got my mango here, ready to sniff as soon as this live stream is over. Okay, great stuff, everybody. We've done an hour of application. We've covered far and wide, from remittances to currencies to specialisation to the UK. Just a nice session thinking about different examples and things. Thanks for joining in as always. Keep in mind, Sunday is a policy focus. UK economy, monetary, fiscal, supply side policies. If you want an hour on that, that's where we're going to be. I think it's Sunday morning at 11. And then Monday, we're going to do a half an hour warm-up, multiple choice, few calculations, and a chance to ask some questions ahead of paper 2 on Monday. We don't do any question spotting. We just do a gentle warm-up just to reassure people. No motivational speeches, no BS, just gentle educational support, because we know how hard you're working. We hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for joining in. Hopefully see you on Sunday. Most importantly, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, stay curious, and see you soon.